All right. Thanks for being here, Mike Brevik, marketer, enterpriser, podcaster.
Yeah,
How did you
appreciate it.
decide? How did you decide on your first or on your setup and format for your podcast?
You know, I got kind of presented it to me as, hey, you should start doing a podcast and all this other stuff. And when I first kind of looked into it, I'm like, well, what would I have to offer that's not out there? And after kind of doing some research, I kind of landed on this idea of, I want to land somewhere between marketing and entrepreneurship and, just kind of put some positive business stuff out there and be really transparent about it. I mean, I feel like a lot of podcasts are, they can be a little salesy sometimes. And it's like, I just want to keep mine very conversational and very organic and just kind of see what happens. And, all that said, I didn't have much of a plan, but that's where I started. And, that's kind of where I've ended up and stayed, the whole time.
Yeah, the storytelling aspect of it, I think, is good because it brings people in. They learn a little something they didn't know about a specific topic, but they also use it as an example to see how it works in real life. So that's good.
Agreed.
How did you
I was just
go
going to
ahead?
say, I think people really appreciate perspectives as well because we've all got different experiences and whatnot. So like to get that out of people, there's value there, whether you agree with it or not. I think that the perspectives they're interesting and they're valuable. So
How'd you determine the format, like the amount of time the podcast would be and such?
I mean, it's been all over the place. I think most recommended podcast experts are going to tell you that 12 to 15-minute range. And then there's a lot of people that watch the Joe Rogan podcast, so that's 3 hours. And it's really all over the place. So like I do keep in mind, I try to keep it digestible, to be that 15 to 25-minute range. But if it's a good conversation, I'll just ride it out because I don't want to miss out on an opportunity for good content. And sometimes I just split it up into pieces because, when you're on a good conversation and a good role with somebody, you don't really want to abruptly, cut it in half either. Cause I think there's a momentum and a building point to it. So I like to just kind of ride that out and see where it goes and then edit it after the fact. But, you know, it's kind of trial and error as far as I'm concerned. I've had episodes that I thought would be successful that weren't, and I've had episodes I thought were duds that people love. So it's like I just kind of ride the train and try to learn as I go.
Yeah. Yeah. That it is strange how you feel good about one, or I mean, not that you feel bad about any of them, but you just feel better about one than another. And it turns out to be, you're the only one that feels that way.
Right, 100%.
So how much editing do you do then?
Very little. I would say at the beginning, I think it was a little more choppy because I myself was a little green and, I myself was a little unsmooth, put it that way. But now that we've kind of gotten into it, we basically edit the front and the back and everything in between is for the most part unedited. I mean, unless there's like some major white noise or some gaps that got to be pulled out. But for the most part, kind of what you hear is what actually happened. We don't edit it too much. The only thing I have learned though that I will say on that part of it is I've had some great conversations after we stopped recording. And then I'm like, dang, I wish I would have kept that thing rolling.
Yeah. It's hard to capture the I'm not being recorded conversation, but then subversively record it. So I feel the same way about that. I have times where stop the recording and then there's another hour of conversation and you're like, oh man, this
Yeah.
would have been the better podcast. And
Yeah.
sometimes the other person says it, but I'm
Right.
thinking it. And
And it's not, I mean, it's not like proprietary or secret conversation by any means. I think
right.
almost like the crescendo has already happened. So once technically the camera's off, I think they just settle in a little further and they open up a little more just naturally. But yeah, I mean, it's many times that's happened where I'm like, dang, that probably, like you said, probably was the better podcast, but whatever.
Yeah, it has the longer conversation. You get past that initial thing, and it is different when you get into the first hour, second hour, third hour. I mean, I haven't talked to a lot of people for the over the 3 hour time, but
Right.
it's it's something to consider and to try if you're talking with someone that it's really going well. That's not to doesn't mean that if you have a 20-minute podcast, you didn't think it was going well. It just means there's a little certain something else, or the topic goes to where it keeps your interest. I don't know. It makes it sound like the shorter ones are bad. I don't think they are sometimes,
No.
but
Yep. No, I would say even from the side of having to produce a podcast, some people are just they're almost well rehearsed in a way where, again, not that it's about bad podcast, but they come, very prepared with their bullet points, their talking points, like they kind of have their routine down, and they're great in between the bumpers of when you're recording. And then after that, they're not natural conversationalists. And then
yeah,
you have other people that, like, you could just envision bellying up to the bar with them and sitting there all night long because they're just talkers, and that's not, one is better than the other, but you don't really know which one they are until you start recording, or even stop recording sometimes.
yeah. So how did you and how do you now keep that keep on track of a conversation, because it's kind of a guided conversation depending on how narrow your topic is, but still allow for that extra interest to come in? Do
Yeah.
you have questions that you're like, okay, this is what I want to talk about, or do you have an outline, or do you have specific things, or how do you work that?
I mean, I do some front end research, and I try to come to every podcast with, I mean, I probably come with 5 to 10 preloaded questions where if I get jammed up, or if I need something to draw to, I can refer back to that list. But I mean, I can probably only count on 2 fingers how many times I've actually used the list. Otherwise, I mean, and I do it more as an exercise to prepare, but
Hmm.
99% of the time when the podcast starts, it's free flowing conversation. And my only, the back end goal that's kind of rolling around in my brain at the time is to try to connect the dots, for the purpose of the podcast, because sometimes you just get lost in the conversation. And for me, like, I want to always kind of keep my audience in mind, that it's marketers, it's entrepreneurs, it's people that are kind of that mindset. So throughout the podcast, that's probably the only thing, is I'm trying to bring it back to the road once in a while so people can kind of see the connections. But otherwise, it's pretty free flowing. But I think prepping is important. You don't have to spend hours doing it, but 15 to 30 minutes to just figure out who they are, what they're about, what their podcast is about. It just helps because you know, I think if anything, it kind of helps transition conversation a little bit. It helps you be nimble. I've been on a few clunky podcasts, and you can just tell they didn't come prepared, or they just don't know that much about the topic or the person or whatever it is. And not that that's bad. It's just for my own personal, you know, kind of goal in the whole thing, is I just want to make sure I come prepared and feel natural about the conversation.
Yeah, I think that's the thing, is it's the art of conversation, and maybe a lot of people don't practice that much.
Yeah. Well,
So
and
it's yeah.
I think it helps being from a small town too. And, like, small talk is just part of the gig. So, like, I'm kind of naturally wired to kind of engage in that small talk. So it comes pretty quick for me. So,
Yeah, very nice, very nice. I wonder if that's because I see a lot of similarities on how I think about it and how I deal with it. 15 to 30 minutes of show prep is good. You can definitely over prep, and then you get to the conversation and you either know too much, you're never going to cover it all, or you're bored of it. That sounds bad to say, because you're like, I've already done all this. I know all these answers to the questions. So I don't have anything that I'm going to capture that passion of asking about, because I've already answered it. But I do,
yep.
for the prep, I think about it maybe 15 to 30 is good. About 5 to 10 minutes before, I look over questions that I just have written down in general about the topic, just to get that part of the mind working. And then I imagine having a conversation with the person about this or that. and I just
Yeah.
see where that goes. And that's how you join those things together. But I've also seen and talked to people that just have questions. And when all you do is go down the list of questions, it's not a conversation, it's an interview. I mean, I
Right.
guess a conversation is kind of like an interview too, but it's different feel to it.
Yeah, I think it's just more natural, and I think it's if the information, if the content is there, I think it's even important to go out and seek video. Like if you can find a podcast they've been on or some kind of a audio of sorts so that you can just get a sense of how they talk, what their pace is, how they frame up questions. Like that's probably getting a little too OCD, but I find that, even 15, 20 minutes of that helps because it kind of, I don't know, it kind of eases you into kind of what you can expect from that person, whether it's you interviewing them or them interviewing you. It's helpful. And I think, I don't know, that might be a little bit too deep into the psychology of it, but for me, it really helps kind of frame up, the conversation and whether or not I'm going to click with that person. Cause sometimes you don't know till you get there and that can throw you off.
What other podcast did you listen to podcasts before you started doing your own, or what got you into that then?
I definitely did, but it was under a different context. Like I listened to podcasts I like on topics I liked, and I just listened to it for the kind of the ear candy of it, but I didn't really pay attention to the mechanics of it. And once I started podcasting, and
Mhm.
it's hopefully it's not that evident to the listener, but I got through my first 5 or 10 episodes and I'm like, man, I suck at this. I have to get better. So I started kind of paying attention to how other people do it and kind of, and I don't know that there was anything really profound in that process other than to kind of make me aware of my own pace and my own conversation and my own kind of pattern as to how I approach it. But yeah, I mean, I think listening to podcasts helps. I mean, I think it just from the pacing, from the setup, and even um, the different platforms and tools that are out there. Every once in a while, you'll get people that talk a little bit about what they use as far as equipment, tools, software, those kinds of things. And I know there's a million options out there. So there's this kind of fear of like, oh, geez, where do I start?
Mhm.
And any of these things they're probably all going to work for you. But to start to develop a little context around all the options that are out there and who uses what is pretty helpful as well.
So do you use now what you started with, or did you have some big changes or little changes to your tools and equipment?
The only thing I've swapped is my recording platform just because I just was running into some technical issues. And unfortunately, the issues never happened when it was just me kind of farting around with the program. It was
Mhm.
always happening during recording. So that became a ripple effect into the editing process. And I was like, man, this is just not going to work. And I switched to a different platform. And since then, it's really been a lot smoother, but also just in the last, 9 to 12 months with the kind of inflection of AI and kind of all the tools and add-ons that they're doing now within these tools to even edit, create snippets, those kinds of things. Like it's
Mhm.
getting easier and easier to just kind of do it all in one place.
Do you pull your audio and video apart and then put it back together, or are you just doing audio?
We've done all kinds, but typically we just do the video. We just take the video file, and then if we need to extract audio from that, we just do it all in one, kind of one file. But I've done it many different ways. Like one of the things I like, most platforms do this is that you can export the audio and video tracks separately. So if you do have
Mhm.
an episode that maybe the connection's bad or the conversation gets a little janky, you can kind of shorten it up and kind of cut that down to make the conversation feel a little bit more fluent. So that's pretty helpful. I mean, and we haven't done a lot of it, but even taking those audio clips and, doing like voiceover type stuff over stock video and those kinds of things that are pretty helpful as well. So we've done it a
So
variety of different ways.
on your podcast, is it I was listening to it on Spotify. Do
Yep.
you do video on yours too, or is it just audio?
We do. We started out just doing audio, but I mean, it wasn't long. I don't know, maybe 6 months into it where it just started to make sense of, well, why wouldn't we be pushing these to YouTube? And we were using things, when it was just audio, we were using things like Headliner and some different things to put some animation to it. But you're going through the motion anyway. So if you can do it, and what I mean by that is there's some people that just can't be on camera. I mean, they're comfortable talking and they're comfortable doing the audio version. And then once they get on camera, they get awkward and don't know where to look. And it's a kind of a next level. You got to get used to it. But I'm like anybody else. The first couple episodes, I was like, man, do I really sound like that? Or do I really look like that? Or I didn't know I made so many facial expressions, like things like that. But once I kind of got over that hump, it's like, yeah, whatever. I mean, it'll be what it is. And apparently this is what I look like anyway. So don't overthink it. But then I started doing the video stuff so that we could support it on YouTube and do things with it, from a content perspective.
How much time do you spend doing your social media stuff for just one show?
I'd say anywhere from 3 to 4 hours, maybe 5 tops. Because
Wow.
we kind of have a routine down for it, and it's to distribute it across the platforms, is to make, grid type graphics for Instagram. It's to get it, push it out on YouTube. It's to, there's kind of a staggering process to do it. But I would say on our worst day, 3 to 4 hours.
Wow. I mean, at first to me, that seemed like a lot. And then I think about all the different times of uploading things to YouTube, scheduling them, and then going to Instagram where I put the clips up, 3 clips per episode on different days. So you have that little bit of time, the 10 to 15 minutes. Plus it gives you an opportunity to check in with all the other stuff going
Right.
on Instagram. You get lost in that a little sometimes, but it's nice to see what other people are doing.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
I
I
would
guess 4 or
say
5 hours is.
yeah, I would say as a marketing company too, we're probably doing more than most,
Mm.
from a SEO perspective and content development. Like, I mean, we're just probably putting more thought into it. Not that that's a bad thing, but we're just more conscious of a lot, a lot of different things, and trying. Sometimes we're just dabbling too. We're trying to do, how do we get more views? How do we change up the, kind of the SEO approach? How do we, so we're kind of building the bike as we're riding it as well.
SEO. What's that?
SEO is search engine optimization. So
Okay.
yeah, like, your Bing, your Google, anybody that goes out there and crawls your data. So when somebody does a Google search on you, where you show up in that ranking or what page, all of that back end effort and all those little tips and tricks and things you can do basically hopefully get you there faster, but also move you further up the page, against competition or against like-minded keywords, or even, you know, people that are similar to you as far as like the content and the industry that you're in.
Yeah, based on the impressions and views, you can tell when the algorithm picks you up. And
100%.
I've looked at maybe not too much, but enough information that I developed the idea that it, even the people that make the algorithms and look at it don't really understand what's happening, how a video gets picked up and how it doesn't. I'm probably wrong on that, but it's it's led me, maybe it was more laziness that led me to get this view. Was I'm just going to put it up there and then see what happens. I don't know what's your view as a marketer.
Yeah. So this is not from any official data. So like if anybody wants to chew me up from
Your
a marketing
feelings.
perspective, this is my feeling, is that, to your point, I think the secret sauce of the algorithm, how it works, what it picks up, when it picks up, why it picks it up, the seasonality of it, that is all under lock and key at the search engine headquarters itself. Google, Bing, Facebook, they don't want you to know the secret sauce because they can't monetize it that way, and they can't necessarily control the outcomes that way. And if they can't control the outcomes that way, there's no leverage. So to your point, yeah, I don't think anybody 100% knows how. I mean, to be able to truly manipulate that and navigate that in a 100% positive way, I don't think that's possible. Now, knowing what we know and using the things that we do know to our advantage, yeah, you can steer it around to some degree. I'm making this up, but maybe it's 60, 70%, maybe 80 on your best day. Like you said, if the algorithm picks you up. But as far as 100%, no, I don't think anybody knows. And it's, the other truth of the matter is it's changing all the time. So it's really hard to be perfect at that kind of thing. But I do think there's value there. I do think trying to, how do I squeeze as much potential and benefit out of that 60, 70%? I think that's important. But I don't think it's life or death whether you do it or don't, because there is organic traffic. There is ways organically to move yourself up the list. And you never know what's going to pop. That's the whole thing with even the idea of going viral or, things like that, is you don't know what's going to pop on what day or who's going to go crazy on TikTok with your stuff. So, again, I'm not saying don't do it, but there are ways around it as well, if that's just not something you want to spend your time with or invest in.
Yeah, I look at it like Adderall. You can take it and you feel like, word on the street is, I don't know, I haven't taken Adderall, but what I've gathered is it makes you feel like you're focused and concentrating, but the studies show you're not really more focused and concentrating when you're on it. You just feel like it.
Yeah.
So if you're doing all that optimization and you feel good about it and it gets you excited about your podcast or excited about whatever business you're doing or whatever, then okay, there's the positive. Even if it
Yeah.
doesn't result in anything you could measure, at least it's making you feel better. I'm
Yeah.
not sure if that makes me feel better thinking of it like that, but maybe it does. How do you stay engaged or passionate about podcasting?
I think there's just putting expectations on it. Like, what I run into a lot with people that I know that are in podcasting, or even clients that we've helped spin up their podcast, is everybody's they're looking at the Joe Rogans or the Rob Dyrdeks, or they're looking at kind of the creme de la creme of podcasts. And it's like, I'm not saying don't, those are great podcasts, but when you're at zero, you got to lower your expectations a little bit so that you can kind of figure out how to grind your way towards the top. And why I say that is because a lot of podcast people come out of the gate hot. They're fired up. They're excited about the podcast. And then they go looking at their data or their stats afterwards. And it's like, man, only 50 downloads or only 50, don't get deflated by that, because you can only go up from there. And I think sometimes in looking at the big dogs, like you look at the Joe Rogans or whoever, you're kind of deflating your expectations by kind of looking at those guys instead of looking at where you're at in the process, or even looking at people in your space. So even to kind of cap it with like social media or SEO, I think it's very similar. Is where are you at in the process? What are you spending on it? And what are your expectations in alignment to that? And that's, stay there, kind of convince yourself, or at least know where you're at in that process so you can realize whether you're doing a good job or not. And for me to stay motivated on it, I'm just happy that people are listening to the podcast. I listen, because I get people that reach out and say, hey, I want you on my podcast, or I want to be on your podcast, or I heard about X, Y, and Z topic from your podcast. A lot of that stuff does not show up in the data. So regardless of what the stats might say, you got to listen to the people that are kind of throwing the compliments out, or even asking to be part of it. And that's worth something to me. And, I kind of look at it too, like very low expectations financially, and just from an hour perspective, what I put into it. I only really need 1 or 2 clients a year to offset the cost. So I just kind of keep my expectations in line. And obviously, if I can get to the Joe Rogan level or whatever, great. But I'm not focused on that.
Yeah. That's like, I listened to some of the podcasts I listen to regularly or watch regularly. Rogan's one of them, but there are times where he has a podcast and I go, well, I don't listen to the whole thing. And I used to feel bad about it because I was like, well, maybe I missed out on something, but it is 3 hours. But I think it's good because you get to things that you wouldn't get to in a 10-minute conversation or a little snippet type conversation. And
Right.
I like the conversationalness of it because I'm not sure if that's a word, because it's kind of like you're there. You can't say anything, but it's like you're part of that conversation. So
Yep.
there are times where I've thought, am I just talking to an empty room? Is it just going out there and then nothing? And I think that's maybe a lot of people feel that way at times about the podcast. And then you just keep going. You can look at all the stats about when people start podcasts, how many go to this many amount of episodes and how many go to this. And I mean, if you do over a certain amount and it's not very many, then you're in that top 1% of podcasts. There's so many podcasts in that 1%, but it's, I think the thing that keeps you going is, are you interested in the topic and is it still fun to do? Like, I like thinking about the technical side of it, not too technical. I don't want to tear apart video and audio and try to compress one and the other and then match them back up in a program. But
Yeah.
I like that that's available for people if they want to do that. That's pretty great. And I've talked to people that get way more technical on it than I do. But what equipment do you use specifically to do everything? How long does it take you to set up to do a show? And
Yeah, this is going to be awfully disappointing for you, but it takes me around 30 seconds to set up because
Mhm, mhm.
I don't have any special equipment. And not that I won't, buy a ring light or something down the road, but right now, like my camera's really good on my Mac. I have an Apple laptop. My camera's really good on my laptop. I have a microphone with a kind of a filter on it, but other than that, that's it. And I mean, it's easy to set up. And I would say anybody who wants to start out, don't get too caught up in buying all this equipment or soundproofing your room, or again, those are all great extra things that you can do, but just get started. Like that's more than anything. Just get started and you can always add those pieces in later. And to kind of, you had mentioned something about like kind of talking to an empty room, and you know, is that one of the things you think about? And it is, but like I really focus on the people that I'm talking to. So to me, if we have a good conversation, personally, I'm getting value out of that. But also, if I can extract good content or good conversation out of the person on the other side, the topic list is endless. And I see that a lot of times, like with my clients, like, because I don't know what to talk about, or I've already talked about that, or what do I do? Just repeat myself. And it's like you got to get over the hump of feeling like you have to bring all the conversation all the time. Like if you interact with the person on the other side and can kind of play off them and just have a decent conversation, it'll just go where it goes. And more times than not, I mean, like I mentioned earlier, yeah, I've had a few episodes that I didn't, I mean, maybe to the listener they were fine, but I didn't think they were as conversational as they could have been. But
Mm.
9 out of 10 times it, if you just kind of follow the lead of the person on the other side and just have a good conversation, it's almost hard to not come out with some decent content. So I don't know. I keep it pretty low pressure. I mean, I try to, come as prepared as possible at all times, but from an equipment standpoint and a kind of a studying up standpoint, like as organic as I can keep it, the better. But I do try to at least come educated so I can be nimble too.
Yeah, the ones you get where it's hard to have a conversation, I like that, to the point of it's a challenge, because now you have to figure out, okay, how can I talk to this person?
Yeah.
Well, what's the best way to talk to them? And in life, if you're talking to people, you've got a lot of different tools to work with. So you just got to start going through that. And it's interesting to see how the conversation develops with people that maybe are, I don't know if they're nervous or just not used to talking to people. And you start to see them get a little more comfortable with it, or you find that thing that they're interested about, or that way you can talk to them about it, and it just takes off from there. And every now and then you have somebody that you just is tough. You just, and you look
Yeah.
back at it later and you're like, man, how do I talk to this person? How do I talk to a person like this in the future so we don't have these issues? But it's, yeah, I like the learning part of podcasting, or just life in general, I guess. And then this little section of podcasting where it takes this much time up in my life now. And I wonder, what was I doing with that time before? Because this is, if I stopped doing this, it would definitely be a little hole in life of the experiences you've had and the technical side of things, whether it's the editing or the scheduling or thinking about the topics, learning different things. I think that's the great part, is you're learning something. And if every episode you learn a little something, whether it's
Yeah.
about the topic you're talking about or about the behind the scenes, maybe I need to note this for a clip or not, and it might make it easier further on. Just those little things, that on the job training part of it keeps
Yeah.
it fresh and interesting, I think.
Yeah. And again, I think those perspectives are just, you never know when you're going to get something that kind of clicks with you, but I think those perspectives are huge. And I'll just mention it because you could probably see him moving around, but like I try to keep it really casual and organic on my side as well, so that hopefully it disarms the person on the other side. So you might have saw my dog. Where is he?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
You
he's
might
back
have,
there.
yeah, you might have saw him moving around in the back, and it's like, now is that a production flaw, or I don't know. Like he's there, so I just let him hang out, and sometimes he gets on the podcast, sometimes he doesn't, but I do it intentionally because I want the person on the other side to know this is an organic thing. Like this is not a production for me as well. Um, and just you haven't mentioned it, but like I meet a lot of people too, where we even strike up connections they last years. I've made some pretty decent friends just in the podcast process because we clicked, and they might email me 3, 4 times a year and ask my opinion on something, or hey, do you know anybody that does this, or whatever. But it's great for networking as well. I mean, I don't know that I go into it with that mindset, but naturally it just happens.
Yeah, I agree. I have emails with poets regularly, so it's good.
Yep.
All right, then. You talked about equipment before, but
Yeah.
what program do you use? I think that back when podcasting started, it was probably much more difficult than it is right now. And now it just seems like you have a laptop or a phone and a certain program, and you're going to be able to do a technical podcast that exceeds what it used to be 20 years ago.
Right.
So, what is the program that you're using now?
So I've had a lot of clients use just straight up Zoom, which honestly I don't fully recommend, but
Mhm.
people do it all the time. But that works for them. I started out on Squadcast, and it was great to start out with, but I did start to experience some issues, and some things were happening, and just for the sake of like, hey, I don't want to deal with this, I moved on to Riverside. And in fairness, Squadcast has probably evolved like anybody else has. But now I'm on Riverside, and I've been on them for, I don't know, a couple years now. But I don't know, really smooth, goes really well. The capabilities within are always evolving, especially with the, like I said, the introduction to AI and some of those things. It pretty much does everything I need it to do and then some. In fact, we're probably not even utilizing all the functionality, but it's a pretty slick, user friendly program. I've only had, every once in a while you run into somebody on the other side who has problems because, it might be their equipment, or maybe it's an old browser or something. But I was running into that a lot with excuse me, with Squadcast, but I've only had that happen a couple times on Riverside, and whether or not that was even Riverside's fault, I have no idea. It was just one of those things where the person on the other side was having trouble logging in, and could be user error, I don't know, but otherwise it's been kind of smooth as silk.
Yeah, when I started, and I haven't been doing it that long, but I looked at Zoom and then a couple other ones, and then settled on StreamYard.
Hmm.
And just in the time that I've been on StreamYard, they've developed some things that made it better. And it was pretty good to start with. And now there's other things. And I think a few of them were added, and some of them I just figured out, or I looked at the directions and I was like, oh, you can mark areas in the video to come back later with just pushing a button. Oh, that's pretty great. And then the AI one for clips is nice. It doesn't always work, but it works pretty good.
Yep.
So it's the how easy it is pretty amazing. Like what you were saying before of just start doing it. If you think you want to do it, start doing it.
Yeah.
If you get past, what is it, 10 or 15 episodes, you're getting into the area where a lot of other podcasts don't get to. And I kind of equate it to the long form conversation where you're learning things that you wouldn't learn, or you're having a conversation with someone that you wouldn't normally have because it's the more brief. And now you're learning more about podcasting just from doing podcasting. So
Yeah,
yeah.
and I think just the exercise of doing it is it's a process of building the confidence and building the ability to kind of speak to your craft. And um you mentioned it, so I'll throw this in there as well, is that I don't remember the exact percentages, but in the vast world of podcasts, there's only like, I want to say like less than 10% that survive past the 17 mark. That's like 15 to 17 episodes is kind of the drop off point where people give up.
Yeah.
Might even be lower than that. If anybody wants to fact check them, go ahead. But it's insanely low. Like, so when you start to think about podcasts, and like, yes, there are a lot out there, but the vast majority of them, 80 plus percent of them are going to quit on you. So to be one that kind of sticks it out and drives forward and actually is able to hit the 50 episodes, 100 episodes, whatever, you're in a very small group of people. So yeah, anybody, point being is, if you're thinking about starting a podcast, just do it and don't give up. Like, stay with it until you get past that kind of that hump, and it gets easier for sure.
How much research did you do before you started yours? Like looking at YouTube videos about equipment and how to do it. How long did it take you before you went from thinking about doing a podcast to actually doing it?
Maybe 30 days. Like, it was brought up to me, not that I hadn't thought about doing one, but I was kicking that can down the road every chance I got. And one of my business partners that I work with on the regular is like, dude, you need to do a podcast. And he kind of pressured me into it. And then at that point I was like, well, all right, whatever. I mean, if it tanks, it tanks. And I just kind of went into it with like, I'm just going to do it and see what happens. But it probably took him at least a couple weeks to a month to convince me to do it. And even at the beginning, I'll be honest, like, it was awkward. And those first couple episodes, I'm like, man, I don't know. I don't know if I want to keep doing this. But once I stuck with it and kind of got over the hump and got comfortable with it and got past the awkwardness, because I think that's the hardest part, is you got to get uncomfortable sometimes to grow. And that was a hurdle that I needed to overcome myself in this process. So
Yeah, it's like, even if you look at Joe Rogan's, I think maybe the number one podcast. If not, it's certainly up there.
yeah,
And when I first started listening to that, I think he was still in the triple digits. So it was like 7 or 800, maybe a little below that. I think he's in 2,000 or more now. But I remember listening to it going, oh, this is pretty cool. I'm going to go back and listen to the first ones and see. And then I started listening to them. I was like, I can't deal with this.
right.
There are things that are current events that talk about, or just topics or whatever that's going on at the time. But I was like, man, he's still figuring this out. I can't look at this. And then, I looked at, usually if I talk to somebody about podcast, I'll look at their first one and then look at more recent ones and then some in the middle. And with yours, I like the summary of it. I listened to the first one, I think was the shoe one. It's good. Yeah.
Yep.
I'm not, I think is if the topic is interesting, the conversation is going to be interesting, and then it's just going to get better from there, I think.
Yeah, and I think that's something important for everybody to realize too, is not every topic's going to be, you know, your audience's jam. They're going to pick and choose which ones they like. they're going to migrate towards certain ones versus others, and that's totally fine. That's totally okay. I think sometimes, at least I've experienced it with my clients, is, we have it in our head that like we expect them to go from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to 4 to 5, and just kind of like I want them to digest every episode. And it's like, but that's not realistic, because
Yeah.
you're eventually going to hit a topic where they're like, I'm not that interested in that, or I don't necessarily like that person, or maybe it's just somebody's voice. That happens too, where you're like, God, that guy's annoying, and whatever. But if you try to make good content, they're gonna latch on to the ones that they like, and the ones that they'll ignore the ones they don't like, which is totally fine. And I've even had, you know, I don't know, maybe my voice annoys the hell out of people too. Could be, but they don't listen
Uh,
to me. That's fine.
yeah, it takes all kinds. Takes all
Yep,
kinds.
yep.
How do you do your scheduling? Like, how do you find guests, and then what's your process for scheduling them?
Yeah, the schedule, I mean, to be fair, like our scheduling and cadence has been all over the place, because sometimes it's based on our ability to get guests, and sometimes it's time of, do I have time to record episodes, or so. I mean, unsuccessfully, we've been all over the place. Consistency is key. I will say that. I'm a hypocrite saying that, but consistency and delivery is key. But we've struggled with that because there's always something going on, or feels like something else that takes priority. As far as getting guests, um, that's just a marathon, but you got to start somewhere. So start putting feelers out there, start having conversations, and it's all based on momentum. Eventually you'll get, one will lead to two, and two will lead to four, and four will lead to eight. And all of a sudden you get a little pipeline built up of people that want to be on your podcast. But it's tough starting out, because you got to explain it to people. And I think there's a little hesitancy sometimes, if now that I'm past my 100th episode, it's a lot easier to get guests than it was in my first 20.
Oh,
Which makes sense, I guess. But yeah, it's just a process you got to keep working at. And try to do a mix. Like I do a lot of kind of guest driven content right now, but I have a lot of standalone episodes too, where I'll grab a topic and just rip on it for 15-20 minutes. Um, find which way works for you, play with them, play with the different options, and try to figure it out. Because I don't think one's necessarily better than the other, or vice versa. But if you do go down the guest route, then yeah, you gotta procure all those guests and chase them down and try to get them on your podcast. And it's just a process. And I would say go after, don't look at where you're at in the process, because I think sometimes I'm not going to go after a guest that's too big because I don't feel worthy of it, kind of a thing. Don't let that stop you. If you get a no, you get a no. It's no big deal. But if you kind of shoot for the stars, and you're kind of shooting for the bigger guests, you'll get a few heavy hitters along the way. I've had a few, I've had a few guests on my podcast that just still blow my mind, where I'm like, I don't know why, I don't know how I got them on my podcast, but you get a few of those once in a while. So
wow. Yeah, that was the biggest stresses for me starting was, am I going to have enough to do a show every week? And how do I get guests? And the first 10 to 15 were people I knew. And then I got with matchmaker.fm,
yep.
which is not matchmaker.com. That's a different website. But .fm are people that have podcasts that are looking for guests, and people that want to be on podcasts. And that one took the stress away from it, even to the point where you almost have too many.
Yeah.
I don't think you can just deal with it. But then I started out with one episode per week on Wednesdays, because it's released on Wednesdays, hump day. And then I was like, well, I have more people that want to be on, or that I want to talk to. So now it was 2, and then I went up to 3. And I think comfortably I could do 4. But then after that, it turns into it's a real job now,
Yeah. Well, and there's a quality you got to maintain too, because
Yeah.
I've used different services and even done it myself personally. And if you want to just find warm bodies, I mean, that's easier. You will find people to come on, but you got to kind of maintain that quality and that conversation level, and then it does get a little harder after that. But yeah, it takes time, coordination, just the communications back and forth to get them all set up. It's a process, and it's nice when you get somebody to support you in that, because then you can still jump in where you need to. But um, it's a huge undertaking, and I think starting out, I felt like I kind of knew that, but I definitely undersold it to myself how much work that was going to be.
Hmm. Yeah, it's my success rate of people I ask versus people that show up is like 50%.
Yep.
And you got to be organized, keep a spreadsheet so you don't ask the same person over and over again. And I I wonder how many people just don't respond because maybe they look up your show and say, "Oh, they only have 30 episodes or whatever, so I'm not going to worry about that." I've had one person that told me to call them back after I have 250,
Yep.
and then I just put them in the spreadsheet for never call back. Yeah.
Correct.
So it's
Yep. I'm the same way. Like I think the two things that get you the no, one is your listener count and or your how many episodes you have, because I think people want to disqualify you if
mm,
you're not where they think you should be. But then also, like, I think sometimes the person you're trying to get on the podcast, they don't have the creativity to envision themselves in that conversation. Because like I've tried to get people on my podcast that I believed were just slam dunk, like we will have a great conversation, and they're
mhm.
just like, well, what would we talk about? And I can tell by their energy, like they're just, okay, you're going to be a problem. And like you said, they might go on the list, but they're on, like, I might circle back with them later, but I'm not going to pursue them if they can't envision themselves in this conversation. I'm going to have to beat it out of them, and that's not fun. And it doesn't make for good content.
Yeah. I'm surprised at how many people on like Matchmaker, and there's a couple other sites like that just don't respond when you send a thing out. Like you're like, okay,
Oh yeah.
they're interested in being on a podcast. You've looked at their stuff and go, this is somebody I'd like to talk to. Think it could be interesting. And then you send them a message and just nothing. So I
And
guess I like that better because it takes up less time than the person that says, well, tell me more information about this. And then
yeah.
you end up getting nothing. So
Yeah, and I use that that tells me what I want to know as well. It might not be the reaction I wanted, but it tells me what I wanted to know, and they're going to go in my no tab or whatever in my spreadsheet. But I think it's for those who are hungry and want to grow and kind of understand the art of podcasting, like, for the most part, they should just be down for the conversation. I've only had it happen a couple times, but I would say the other undesirable scenarios is, when they come to pitch, they're basically doing a commercial, and it's like, yeah,
yeah.
I'm okay with, if you want to pitch your business or what you're doing, like, I'm totally fine with that. That's part of why we do this. Um, but don't make it a commercial. Don't, it's not a sham wow
Mm.
action. And I feel like I've had a few like that where I'm like, oh man, we're not getting anywhere because the motives are just too different.
Yeah. Then you learn those little things too. Like, I really like talking to poets, but if you let a poet start reading poetry, you've lost control.
Yeah.
You've lost it. I mean, that's reading poetry on a podcast is not how I digest poetry, but lessons learned on that.
Yeah.
But
Well, and I always say to my team and stuff is, there's a time and a place for everything, but it's not every time, you
mm,
know? So like I encourage these people when they come on the podcast is like, put your conversation first and your pitch second. Like it'll have its moment in the whole thing, but if you lead with the pitch, you're not going to give the conversation a chance to develop.
all right. So I can take a hint. I can take a hint. What
I actually wasn't hinting, by the
no,
way.
no, this is the second time. This is the second time you brought it up. So let's hear about brands. And my
Sure.
question that I wrote down just to remind me about it was what determines the lifetime of a brand? And then I started thinking about how I would answer it, but I'm definitely interested in your
Yeah.
perspective on that.
Well, let me start out by saying I was not pitching, like, but I
I know,
appreciate you.
I know,
But I
I know.
but I but I appreciate it. To me, the branding is kind of it's the silent killer in marketing. It's if you want to grow audience and you want to, get your hooks in them and entrench who you are, what you do, what your purpose is, all these different things inside the minds of your consumers, your listeners, your clients and whatnot. um, Branding is a very passive way to do that, and I think it's really a powerful tool that most people neglect, especially startups. I think brands can not only expedite growth, I think brands can expedite your process, as far as trying to grow a podcast, trying to grow your business, whatever it is. But I also think it extends the longevity of it when you start to develop brand lovers and people who really resonate with the brand, the purpose, and the different things you're putting out there. Um, I hate bringing this up because this topic is spent, but during COVID, I think a lot of people who had brands developed, I think they were the ones who maybe had an easier time or maybe even survived what happened throughout that whole process versus the ones who had to shut down or the ones who had to fold it up. Because I think having that brand, that loyalty, and kind of that foundation kind of there to lean on, it offered them, you know,
Hmm.
a different power and a different leverage in that process that other people didn't have. And that it's I'm biased obviously because it's coming from the brand guy, but I think it's important, and I think it could be managed. It's not something you got to spend the moon on all the time, but it's something that if you bake it into your process and you keep it on the surface, it just over time you're going to develop a stronger foundation. And it's not what's hard about brand is it's hard to measure, and that's where people want to check out on it, is because, well, if I can't measure it and if I can't extract ROI directly from those efforts, then it must not be doing anything. And it's like, that's just not true.
How much of brand is reputation? Like you hear a lot of people talking about their personal brand, but is that just if you're talking about somebody's personal brand, is that more of reputation? And then if you're talking about a company's brand, that's more of, I think reputation is in it, but is it more something else?
I think those are all in like quality, service, maybe it's reputation. These are all ingredients of a brand.
Mm.
But most companies, they're already going out there and doing 3 or 4 or 5 of those things anyway. Like you'll get companies that'll talk about their exceptional customer service and, we do this thing, or they're all kind of making those efforts, but they're not building it up towards one big thing, which is their brand. And to kind of connect those dots and to make it kind of a holistic initiative, that's the part that they're missing out on. And I mean, I get clients all the time that talk about, maybe brand's not for me, or like I don't really subscribe to that. But then I'll meet with those people and they'll be head to toe Under Armour, or they're driving a Mercedes, or they're on some level they're already bought in on different brands that they like. And they could argue, well, I really like the quality of this, or I really like, I'm not saying those things aren't true, but somewhere along the line, you also subscribe to and you bought in on their branding because it's in you now. You know what that brand is about. You know what that product expectation looks like. You could probably sing their jingle if I asked you to. I hate to break it to you, but you've been branded. You fell into
Mm.
the trap, and there's a lot of power in that, you know.
Marketing works for
It
sure.
it it definitely works, and I think branding is something that was always a byproduct of that didn't get its credit, but just in the last 10, 15 years, branding is a major focus. And I think the macho people want to feel like, well, I've not been victimized by branding, and it's
Mm.
like, dude, we all have. Like,
Yeah.
sorry, on some level, we all have.
Trying to recognize it is that's the thing. Like when you're scrolling through Instagram and you get these commercials that are personalized for you by the computer overlords, and you're like, oh well, maybe maybe I do need this camp cot. I need to look that up. Oh, that's pretty good. It's lightweight, it's compact. I'm not going to go camping, but maybe I need something like that just in case. And you're like, oh man, I'm getting marketed to. And
Well,
then sometimes you buy things that you see on there and it's not really what you thought. And then that's when it starts clicking. Oh, this is marketing. I've been marketed
mhm.
to. And
and and you
it's
you buy
okay as long as you recognize it.
Yep, and you bypass the intuition part, which is where the brand kind of takes hold. So, like,
Mm,
if that camp cot, whatever is being presented to you, and you're like, "Oh, I wonder if Coleman makes a brand like that," and I'm gonna go check
yeah.
Bass Pro versus
Yeah.
Camping World. It's like, how do you know those things in your brain, and how are you so quick to jump to one of those solutions to look for that camp cot or even the brand of the camp cot if you've not been branded? And that's just one instance, and it's not a knock on it, it's just that's how it works. So, if you're a X, Y, and Z company and you wanna be the first thing that somebody thinks of when they need whatever, that's branding. So, to be intentional about it and to kinda put efforts there, to me, it's a no-brainer, and it's just like you and I are doing with our podcast, like, it's not all about brand, but it's a component of. So as you trickle down, cyber dogs or whatever it is you want to talk about, there are ingredients within my podcast and even my own personal brand that build up towards this idea of I want people to remember me and my business and my podcast for X, Y, and Z reasons.
Yeah. I was trying to think of an example of, I mean, there's so many examples of branding, as you
Right.
just said, all the things that if you think of something, it's the brand is there. And it's strange, just the word of it, where it's branded in, it's indelible in your mind. And now I'm going to think of Sharpie when I think of indelible markers. I've been branded.
Yep.
And then you think about cool, like what's the brand of cool? And then you go, oh, it's got to be a leather jacket. It's got to be Fonzie. I
Hmm.
mean, motorcycles, things like that. And it's it's just how people remember things, I think. So you gotta, it's that thing we're already doing. So you might as well tap into that to be able to get a product that you believe in out there or get a mindset that you believe in out there.
Yeah, and people like what they like. And again, not that the quality and the service and all those different things, they have to add up to a good experience. It's not that they don't, but there's a lot of forgiveness in there too. Because you take a brand, like Coca-Cola or Nike or whatever, they've put out ad campaigns and they've had Super Bowl commercials and they've had different initiatives that probably from a company perspective have completely flopped from a dollars and cents perspective of the company. But we would never remember that because we just know Nike's awesome and we know Nike's a huge brand and we know they just pretty much hit home runs all the time. We don't remember the failures because there's a lot of forgiveness in there. And, kind of to take it back to the COVID thing, I think that's, when people panicked and thought, like, well, geez, who do I keep in my corner? For those who kind of had the reputation and the brand and kind of that they kind of already had their hooks in them, they couldn't envision themselves going through, like, I can't go through what I'm about to go through without these guys in my corner. And that's where I don't want to say brands saved them, but it definitely helped them.
Mm. So then what is your Cyber Dogs brand all about then? Let's hear the
Yeah.
pitch.
So CyberDogs, we are very much like a traditional agency in the sense that, we build websites and we build brands and graphic design and SEO and paid ads and all these different things. Um, but this is from my personal perspective. CyberDogs is really about transparency. It's about a mindset. It's about a collaboration with clients. I don't view my clients as turn and burn. Like, my client relationships are all long-term relationships and that's the goal. So for me, just to package it up, for me, CyberDogs is a lifestyle brand. It's a mindset more than it is just a service or an execution. And that's kind of how we approach it. Now, I will say that um, that's been a challenge from the beginning because it's foreign to people. You know, they're used to a more transactional type relationship, and they're used to seeing marketing and advertising and graphics and these things. They're used to seeing them in a different context. So when we come into it the way we do, it's a foreign thing to some people, and for some people, it's a turn off. They don't want to deal with it. But for the ones who kind of go, "Hey, this is different," and maybe even different in a way that I've not experienced yet. Those are our people, and those are the kinds of clients that we want to build relationships with over time, because the more time we spend with them, the more time we can procure and build and get to know their brand, the better results we're going to be able to deliver over time. So
Yeah, I like your logo. How did you come up with the name and the logo for your business?
yeah, so I get this question a lot, and I'll tell you, it's going to be a little disappointing for you. The
Go ahead.
name Cyberdogs, the name Cyberdogs actually came from so a buddy of mine and myself. We were kind of doing some projects and some building websites and doing some different things back in our 20s, literally for beer and pizza. We had built some websites for some bars and some different things, and like literally we're just kind of chasing down the kind of work that we could do on the side for beer and pizza money. And we actually did swap out services for beer and pizza a couple times. So that's kind of where it started, the concept of what we were doing. And there was a company called Cyberduck at the time that they had a cool logo, and I kind of liked their name, and I needed something to tell my tax guy. I'm like, how's Cyberdog sound? Because there's two of us and whatever. And that's kind of how we landed on the name. Well, then fast forward 15 years or so, when I decided to kind of walk away from the corporate side, um, I had created a list of names, somewhere 70, 75 names long. And I had done this several times with other companies, and I had some different creative ones in there, but I also had some of your, ascendant marketing, and I had integrity marketing, and some of your more basic, I would say cookie cutter type marketing names. And I threw Cyberdogs in that list as just kind of a sacrificial lamb to a degree. And then I sent that list out to, I think it was, close to 20 people within the marketing industry that I had known for years, and said, "Hey, I'm thinking about starting my own business. Here's a list of names I'm running with. What do you think?" And out of all those people that replied back, Cyberdogs is in the top 3 every time, and no other name on the list. I mean, there's a lot of other names that showed up, but no other name on that list came in the top 3 every time. So for me, it was like, okay, that's got to say something. It definitely has some kind of panache with people. They like it. So we
Hmm.
went with
Hmm.
the name Cyberdogs, and I built the brand around the name, which is kind of backwards, but I built the brand around the name. And I started one of my artists that still works with me today, is we started kind of brainstorming on the logo, and it needed to be creative. And what does that look like? Is there a mascot element to it? And I'm a big sports guy, so I was like, well, I kind of like the idea of there being an animal, and maybe we could extract the, kind of the kind of what that animal's all about. So we landed on the bulldog and the tenacity of a bulldog, and kind of that man's best friend, the loyalty side of it, and kind of deconstructed what, kind of the attributes of a good loyal dog, a bulldog. And obviously the light bulb came into it with the
Hmm.
creativity, and him and I kind of jammed on it together, which was kind of fun. And yeah, that's so we went with the name, and we came up with the logo, and since then have done many different variations of the logo to just kind of shake things up and keep it creative. But this has always kind of been our classic lockup. So
Yeah, I like it. I like it because you can see the dog, and then you have the light bulb, and it's interesting. I wonder what people see first. Do they see the light bulb or the dog? And
I get 3 answers all the time. I get
okay.
one where people just say, "Hey, I love your logo. It's really cool," and they don't. All they see is the dog. And then I get people that only see the dog, and I get people that only see the light bulb. And I love it. Like I've had people ask me like, "Well, don't you think that's a problem?" And I'm like, the fact that they lock in on one thing versus another is more left brain, right brain. it's a them thing, not a me thing. But what's nice about it is they have a surprise coming to them when it clicks. And I've had that where like people have said, man, I always liked your logo, but there was something about it. And just the other day I saw the light bulb. Like it just now clicked. And I like that. It's something for them to kind of extract on. And what that really tells me also from a branding perspective is that there's enough almost interest and intricacy there that they were noodling on it for a while. And I don't know that at this point they'll ever forget it, which that's what you want. You want to be remembered. So
Yeah, it's good. It's good. I like it. It's hunting down the ideas. Then
yep.
yeah, it's good.
Yeah. So that's, like I said, it's not like the greatest story of how we came up with the name, but it's it's actually kind of funny now that we look back at it, because we didn't intend it to be this, like I never in a million years would probably envision it turning into what it's turned into. So
Yeah, I think it's a good story. Since this is a show about creativity, where do you think that creativity comes from? Like when you look at something like that and how your logo unfolded, just as an example, do you think that creativity is something that is manufactured from within us through our experiences and all that, or is it something that's outside of us that's trying to work through us, or is it a mix of both, or something else?
I think it's a mix of both, but I think you have to kind of exercise it like a muscle as well. I know a lot of people in the creative space, or people that went to art school or whatever, and that kind of changed gears on it. They got out in the field and it's like, okay, this is harder than I thought it was, or it was different than I thought it was. And by the time they maybe settled into a different career, a different job, they just quit exercising that muscle, and they quit trying to be creative. They quit trying to be problem solvers, and they just over time lost it. Now, is it still in there somewhere? Probably to a degree, but I think it's something you have to exercise and kind of stay open to, where you had mentioned it, but I think the ability to do that comes from the experiences. I think it comes from the self-awareness of, being okay with the criticism and being okay with other people's perspectives on it. And everybody says that, but there's a lot to be said for those who can embrace it and kind of ride that out. Um, I've had a lot. I mean, I've had different business coaches and different people I've crossed paths with over the last 10 years, and everybody has an opinion, or hey, you know what you should do, and and not that you don't take the good ones and run with them, but for the most part, I know why I started my business. I know the path that I wanted to cultivate, and for the most part, I've stuck pretty close to that. And I think that's why, like my brand, it gets to be something unique and it gets to kind of be its own thing, because I've never quite strayed from that vision. And I think it's important for people who, if they have that creative side to them, or if they have that entrepreneurial side to them, to be able to maintain that and kind of stick to their guns is huge. And it's got to be, I do think you got to kind of be born with it to a degree, but you do have to work it like any muscle.
Great explanation.
Yeah.
What's the best way for people to follow your work or to be able to get in touch with you?
Yeah, they can. I mean, obviously, if you Google me, you'll find podcasts like this, and there's some different content out there. But at the same time, if you go to cyberdogsmarketing.com, CYBERDOGZ marketing.com, that's my marketing company, and where we do a lot of the branding and the websites, those kinds of things. Then you'd mentioned it earlier, is my podcast is called Brand Retro with Cyberdogs. And we talk about stuff like this all the time. So
Nice. Is there a link to your podcast through your website too?
yep, everything is like all my social medias and how to get a hold of me, and links to the podcast and everything are on the website. So
Okay, great. In the show notes will be your podcast or your website, and I think I have Facebook and Instagram too for links.
Sure.
And if anybody didn't have a chance to write it down or whatever, but yeah, I like your website, the Instagram. I think I follow you on Instagram. If I don't, I will, but I think I remember seeing your stuff on there. Is there anything that you wanted to talk about that we didn't, or any thoughts in closing?
No, I first of all, I appreciate the time. I think this was a great experience for myself, and to kind of hit on two topics. I think, if you're ever thinking about starting a podcast, just do it. You can, I mean, you want to learn and get better, but just start somewhere, because you can always work it forward from there. And yeah, if anybody has any questions about marketing, branding, whatever, hit me up, or yeah, follow me online.
Excellent. Thank you very much for your time, and I'll talk to you on the other side of this musical exit.
Excellent. Thank you.